Welcome to the Brainz Magazine podcast, a podcast with in-depth interviews and conversations with world-class entrepreneurs, expert coaches, industry leaders, and international celebrities. Get exclusive insight into the world of business, mindset, leadership, and lifestyle with your host, Mark Seton.
I want to welcome you to the next episode of the Brainz Magazine podcast. And today we have Maria De Laurentiis Reyes. Maria, it's so good to have you. You are a CEO, a business strategist, a speaker, a podcast host, a leadership expert. Is there anything you don't do, Maria?
Well, keep adding to the list. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Absolutely. And it's actually, for me, I love variety. Are you the same? Like, even though we joke about like the fact that you're doing so many things, but is variety like one of the real key ingredients to stay fulfilled and to continue moving forward?
Yes, I have embraced that's an essential part of me being at my best. I am very experiential in nature. Even if I'm doing something, I have to experiment with lots of different ways. But yes, that's what keeps me actually the most creative and the most innovative is doing that. And maybe you feel the same since we share that. If it's too repetitive and the same things, I think I lose the energy. I think a lot of people feel that way, and the creativity kind of gets stunted. So
Okay.
that's the reason.
Going to give you a scenario here because I'll probably slightly contradict myself because I absolutely love variety as well. And I love to be able to express myself in different ways, different platforms. But
Mhm.
let's say I go to my favorite restaurant, I will always order the same thing. If you go into your favorite restaurant, Maria, do you order the same thing or do you mix it up?
Wow, that's a great question, and so interesting to look at it that way. To be completely honest, I think that I have an adventurous nature, but in a restaurant in that scenario, I think that I might dabble with, oh, maybe I'll try this. That sounds interesting. But many times, and maybe not all the time, but probably 60% of the time, I'll go back to what I usually order.
Yeah, I was just thinking like I absolutely do love variety, but yet I definitely get feedback like that I'm very predictable in my choices.
Well, I don't you think it's depends on like context is important,
Of
right?
course.
So
Of
there's a
course.
lot of things with ordering in a restaurant that come into play that maybe not in the work, area and some of the other things that you're more experimental with, and that's for me as well.
Of course. Now you've just taken your glasses off, like so. I'm sure that you're ready for business now, right?
Well, you know what? I realized I don't need them because we're talking here, so I don't need them to talk. Um,
Exactly. I want to hit the ground running, Maria. How are you helping transition and scale businesses? I know it's quite a loaded question at the very beginning, but I think with all your expertise, like, and the fact that you have your own way of doing things, I'd love to kind of really double down on that.
yeah, thank you. So I have the way I look at it and the way that I kind of explain it is that I've been for many years in my own business helping companies from so many different perspectives. So my company, basically what we would do is a very bespoke custom delivery depending upon the needs of the company we were working with. And the way that I address that is I pull from my experience. I did work for many years before I started my own company in the corporate world, in a senior management position, and I pull from my experience there. And I think the best way to explain it is that I take what I've learned and the insights that I have cultivated, and the approach that I've cultivated through all those insights and experience. And I have a set of beliefs and principles that I have seen and proven work. And they are, when you said that was a loaded question, it certainly was, because there's so many elements of scaling and transforming a business and making it more efficient and making it more productive and making, changing the culture. And like, these are big things, right?
Mm.
But there's definitely specific areas that need to be transformed. And sometimes that's the leadership approach. And many times that's like near and dear to me. I take a very different approach than what traditional business looks like
Mm.
because it's proven that it's more effective. And many times it's also just seeing from all the experience I had. I mean, I worked for very big companies, multi-million and billion-dollar companies when I worked in the corporate world, and then have consulted and serviced my clients, which range from small business, depending on the industry, they're small to medium to large. And what I noticed is that in terms of scaling or, really getting to the next level, um, they typically get hung up in like real specific areas. And there's these themes, and it doesn't matter how big or small they are. It could be leadership. It could be, difficulty with staff in terms of engaging their people. It could be systems, not systematizing. It could be not what I'll call multiplying, because many companies, when they try to scale, they just try to sell more or produce more. And that's not necessarily going to help them be more efficient and optimize their results. So definitely a loaded question. Hopefully
Mm.
I gave you some perspective, broadly speaking, on that approach and what I do.
Yeah, I guess for me, I have to remember that if I ask a buffet question, I'm going to get a buffet answer. But sometimes I think it's really good just to be able to talk some things out and then really hone in on one or two based on
Yeah.
the way you answer them. Because obviously, there's so many business coaches, so many leadership teachers, but we all have our own flair. And we all have our own way of doing things. So I think that sometimes even asking the same question to two people do the same thing, you absolutely can get two different answers and it still be true. Um, I know that, working with people is something that's at the bedrock of what you do, especially around leadership. You're a leadership expert. So that was something I really wanted to hone in on, especially with what you were talking about. But what do you believe is the best way to train someone or to develop someone or to lead someone? Like from your experience and the way that you go about things and noticing that we're often, I mean, we're all human beings, so we all respond differently. But do you feel like there is a best or a better way to train people?
Well, if you're talking about training in general, like definitely from a training perspective, you have to adapt to the different ways that somebody learns, the different ways that somebody receives information, right? If we're specifically just thinking about training. And so if I'm doing that myself or my team is doing that, our approach is always, and that's founded from my experience, is to make sure that the delivery of that training or the experience of that training hits the marks in terms of no matter where they are. Some people are more auditory, some people are more visual, some people, most people, and I think that's one of the differentiations for our training programs that I've developed and that I deliver are always relatable. So since I have that experience, it's not from an academia standpoint, it's from a real world, experience, and bringing lots of stories and relatable stories in and examples that helps. But when you think about development, which I look at as a little bit bigger, and especially working with leaders, um, I have a belief. What I believe is that I think traditional ways of leading people and helping them grow, I take a different approach of traditional business does, generally speaking. I'm not saying that there aren't some great leaders in companies, but traditional business and corporate think at least here in the US, I can say, tends to rely on typical business principles that are look good on paper, but don't actually work in the real world.
Mm,
And it really, and I think from a leadership perspective, I believe that really focusing on the relationship and the connectedness of the team and building the confidence of the people that are working with you and for you and on your teams is the best approach, because without being able to tap into and breathe into them that they can do more and that there's more possibility, and to build the confidence, obviously, of course, giving them the knowledge, the skill, and the practice, the room or the space to have the practice. But without that foundation of support and security and safety, you really can't motivate human beings to be more and to do more. So it's not, in my experience, it's not been adopted enough, in my opinion, because the norm of how to lead and how to work with people is very businesslike, you
mm,
know? And again, I'm speaking from here in the States, like it's focused on, of course, businesses are in business to make a profit. But it works way better when you can really, instead of coerce people to do things, really hit it from a foundational level where the energy is so different because people feel and want to contribute more. And I think that's where the magic is. And that's where I think I'm different and we're different in what we bring, because I go against the grain of what traditional business and what
mm,
corporate think is
mm,
in terms of the practices and the approaches.
mm. I heard you say experience of training, which kind of took my attention. So
Mhm.
what does that look like for you, and what is it, a feeling that you're trying to convey with those that you're teaching and leading?
Well, yes, definitely. I want them to have some transformation, whether that's, they have some shift in perspective. They have some, when I say experience, it's also I'm trying to articulate there's a difference between being fed information and being able to experience it by, of course, dialogue, discussion, different modalities that are used in training that are all pretty standard activities. But it's really about the experience of what they come out of that training with. Because somebody can sit and listen to information, but whether or not they are actually going to go and implement that
Mm,
is really where the transformation happens.
mm,
And so what I've found is that making it more of an experience is where in that training um, activity or that training session, they are experiencing the training, it's much more likely that it's going to be reinforced in that session
mm,
and in that experience. And then they are more likely to walk out and implement it and actually do something with what they learned. And I think that's the differentiation. I think a lot of training companies approach it from an educational and academia standpoint. And for me, it's never been appealing to me. So I probably, also read on my own preferences, but also for the 30 years or so that I've been doing this, reading the room in terms of what works, and
mm,
with my own team, what works.
mm,
Um, so that's I think why I say experience, because I do want them to feel something. I want them to a light bulb to go on, a
mm,
shift in perspective, wow, this is like I want to create that transformation,
mm,
um and have them have that. And that doesn't always happen because it depends on what people are coming to the experience with. So sometimes they're told to go to a training and they're not really invested in it. I try to transform that in how I do it, and we all do, in what we deliver. But that matters as well. Hopefully,
mm,
people are seeing that's my job, is to make them in the experience see the benefit from why they're there and why they're participating.
mm. And you've been training, developing people for over 30 years, and I'm just curious as to whether you've seen a change in the way companies and people develop over those 30 years. Has there been something that's kind of really evident?
So this is such a great question. And again, I'm coming from my own experience with the companies that I've worked with here on in the US. I think there's been something that has changed here in the past few years. But I'll say this, years and years ago, I think companies were much more invested in um, training in skills that were not necessary. I don't want to say it like that, that were not tied specifically to job knowledge. So what I mean is, obviously, training has to be done if somebody's going to do a job. They need to know how to do it. They need to know the tools that they're going to use to do it. But I'm talking about what are sometimes, I hate this word, but referred to as soft skills, but basic things like communication and, customer service principles and conflict resolution and leadership. I have an opinion about that I'll state in a moment. But I think there had been a lack of investment over the last 15 years or so because companies, obviously from a cost perspective, were less hesitant to teach those kind of things, those foundational things. Maybe they were assuming that people should come in with them. I don't think that's very valid because these are the skills that people don't learn in school necessarily, you know?
Mm,
These are the skills that are developed through training and application, you know? What I think has happened over the years with US companies is because of cost, wanting to save money, they've brought learning and development. A lot of companies have learning and development in this company, but it's really focused on teaching the skills necessary to do the job, teaching the systems, teaching that.
mm,
But here, what I think has happened is I think we're at a turning point where some companies are going back to understanding that if we want our people to perform well and grow and be the best they can, it's these foundational skills, these soft skills that maybe we shouldn't assume that they have.
mm,
And maybe we shouldn't assume that they come to the table or come to the job with them. And I also think, this is good news, I think that individuals are starting to take an investment in themselves, which is
mm,
such great news. I mean, I think that the metrics were something like, at least in the States, 86% of people granted, we had a global pandemic. So that was a time where I think a lot of people were like, what do I do with myself at this point? Um, but investing in their own development, which I think is amazing and I think is well advised. But so I think there's two sides of it. I think companies are starting to come around understanding the link to having those foundational skills. And I think that people are generally making an investment in themselves, which is great. Um, and I think that's a good start.
mm,
Leadership in general, that's a thing that I think is missed here, is that most leaders don't get training to be a leader. They get promoted,
mm,
they were great at their job, and then they're tasked with leading a team and they don't know how, and they don't know how to do it effectively. And that's a big gap and a blind spot for a lot of people, and or people who start their own company who've never had that experience. A founder doesn't necessarily have the skill set to lead and build a team and create that environment and that culture that really can transform and grow the company and bring the vision that they have to light. So
mm. I think it's interesting when you said, you're seeing that obviously more people are investing in themselves, which is totally true. I think society, because I was kind of joking with a friend the other day, like with like my parents' sort of age, it's almost like what is therapy and what is trauma? Like when they were kids, it was very much, you just suck it up. It's like
yeah,
now, we're very much in the focus of inner child healing and looking at traumas and looking at generational traumas and all sorts of things where there is such a focus on development and wanting to better ourselves, which obviously ripples through into the workplace.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think also, and what you said, those are really great points that I think there's more of an awareness now,
Mm,
that of how that plays into everything and how that, previous generations maybe didn't have that understanding. There wasn't the talk of that in the community and in media and social media and all these things. And I think now we have a better understanding in the mainstream of that is connected. And I would say that's my belief. The better you are at being kind of handling those things on your own and looking inward and having that self-awareness and be the best you can be, that commitment to do that, the better you are going to become as a person, but also it helps in the workplace with all the things. And as a leader, like that's critical. Like
mm,
leadership, you've got to work, it starts with self, you
mm,
know? And maybe some people do state that and believe, and maybe that's true, that
mm,
it starts with self in all
mm,
realms. So I
mm,
think the good thing is people are accepting that
mm,
and starting to do the work, which is great.
mm. Now, you've been called, Maria, the straightforward leader. What does that mean to you, and how do you navigate resistance?
That's a great question, Mark. I'm excited to answer this. Yeah, I'm very direct. I'm very direct, very real. And I think that there's a couple of things about that I've learned. Over the years, I have come to understand that not everybody appreciates that, but there are also many people who love that. And I think that maybe, in my 30 years of working, probably, and growing as a human being and maturing, there was a point where I realized that. And then it was, okay, how do I navigate that when there is that resistance, or I can see that somebody might be put off by that directness?
Mm,
And how do I not lose? Because one thing that I've realized recently is if I tone that down too much, um, it's not good for the person. Like I'm not serving anyone, you know?
mm,
If I tone that down too much, um, it's not serving them. And of course, it's not authentic from who I am. And so that's a delicate balance,
mm,
right?
mm,
And I look at it as, yes, there's been a an effort on my part to know how to not soften it, but actually deliver in a different way. So I'm
mhm,
still direct, but deliver it in a different way. Um, so as to not lose that strength, because I do see it as a strength, and a lot of people say that's a strength. And so I think where I've come to is meeting somebody where they are, but being able to still go straight at it because I'm not serving them if I don't do that.
mm. Yeah, very much, people need to hear what they need to hear, not what they want to hear.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I like that. And I think I can't think what other thought comes to mind, but it's very much, it's no good like diluting yourself in order to concentrate somebody else, because all you're doing is you're you're meeting them, but in doing so, you're devaluing, who you are.
Yeah, and I mean, I think the way that I've come in the last few years to look at it is I'm not serving them either. If
Mm,
somebody needs to hear something, um, I'm not serving them if I'm diluting that. And it's also from a perspective of, it depend again, context is important, right? If I'm trying to temper that in a video or a training, then it's actually making me look less convicted. about
Mm.
what I'm saying or
Mm.
uncertain about what I'm saying. And
Mm.
that's not serving anyone either. So, but again, that's growth for me. That's growth for me, and that's growth for me to figure out how to navigate and utilize that strength, but also do no harm, because that's my intent, is to do no harm.
Mm. You're an advocate for challenging the status quo, Maria. Is there an example where you did this and it led to an incredible outcome?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot. One that's coming to mind right now is I in my one of my it was in my corporate days, but one of my roles and responsibilities was to develop products. And I was responsible also to the delivery of them, so the customer experience. And that's really, I think, where that was the turning point for me, where I was like, I can't let this go. Anytime I see something that could be changed, I have to. And that was really at the kind of the turning point, probably, when, we're at a state now where things change so quickly. So, first off, I want to give you the example, but that's one of the reasons why, and I push my clients, companies have to be ready for it. Can't be like, okay, we're good now. You
Mm.
can't do that. Things change so fast that you've got to be looking for that disruption. You've got to be thinking about what could disruption, like, look for it, and what could I do differently? How could I do it differently? But in those days, we were delivering a product in a way that was not electronic. It was a physical delivery of a product. And this was well before digital delivery was the norm. But I wanted to push us, and I wanted us to take that on. And of course, I had to tell a long story short, I had lots of naysayers and lots of people in the company that will cost too much, and that will create too much change in the organization, and people wanting to do things the same, thinking that the customers would not um, would not like it, clients would not like it, and that we would have a difficulty converting to that kind of delivery. Well, we had to do some things internally. We did them. I made the business case for how it would actually cost less money, because a lot of times that's a lot of short-sighted decisions. People think, and companies think, it's going to cost more to do something more, innovative,
Hmm.
and they don't look long term at, the savings, the cost of
Mm.
not doing it, right?
Hmm.
And so I pushed, and we did, and within the first 6 months of switching to that delivery, 96% of the clients were accepting their delivery that way.
Hmm.
And we reduced costs, because no longer did we have to, produce. It
Mm.
was data. So no longer did we have to produce a CD or some kind of drive that went out and then shipped, packaged, shipped, all of those things. And all of the cost savings in that, it reduced the cost of production by more than 70%.
Amazing.
So I use that as the example. It always comes to mind, because I think that was the first time that, and that was early on. This is like normal operation now for companies, no matter what you're producing. Digital delivery, it's like the norm. Um, but it was a time when that wasn't yet. And had we not done that, and then all the other competition would have been doing that, we would have been behind. And so I always point to that as an example, because it has all the elements of why you shouldn't settle for the status quo. Or, been an expression which I hate that's used, like, oh, if it isn't broke, don't fix it. No, no, no. Like, find another way, because the minute you don't keep looking for that new continuous improvement, how to do it better, how to keep up, what's in the fringe becomes mainstream so quickly, and then you're behind.
Mm.
So yeah, that's probably the best example that I like to use. But it is a guiding principle for sure.
Yeah, I love that. I think, being relevant, staying nimble, being able to evolve and pivot are so important with business. I think relevance is one of the keys, because if we lose our relevance, then we lose our authority and our influence. So we have to keep evolving and metamorphosizing what we offer, how we do things.
Yeah, for sure.
Maria, we only got a few minutes left, but I always like to give a little bit of space for you to share anything like intuitively, or something that you feel you really need to say that we haven't said, or you want to really emphasize maybe something that you have.
Well, I think we've touched on it, but one of the things that, is really coming into focus for me, and I would say that it's always been part of the foundational beliefs and what drives everything I do. But obviously having an impact is important, right? We all personally want to have an impact, and I want what we do, um, everything that the company does, to have an impact in the best way that it can, and the biggest way that it can. And so I think something that's always been weaved within everything from training to coaching to consulting to the training courses that we do is always to help let people see and assist people, everything we do, to see the possibility in what they can achieve, and to not just let them see it, but also to focus on changing the way we lead
Mm-hmm.
as leaders, and all people, even people who, because that's the other thing, it's everyone's a leader. You
Mm-hmm.
don't have to have a position, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the way that we are able to stand in somebody's belief gap, support one another, create a place of belonging, is just, if we do that in our workplaces, in our communities, you know, that's just going to help everyone, and that ripple effect and that impact that it will have. So that's always been there, but it's been more of a outward guiding North Star. And it's through my own evolution and the companies and the team. It's one of our, it's our mission,
Mm-hmm.
in everything we do. And I think the more we as people can do that, and
Mm-hmm.
leaders can change the way they lead,
Mm-hmm.
boy, we can definitely impact, not just ourselves and our company and our country, but the world.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Love that, Maria. Maria, how do people find out more about you and your business? Where do they look?
so I have, the company website is, mytraininginnovations.com.
Mm-hmm.
I also have a personal website, which is mariadr.com. And of course, on all the social platforms and LinkedIn, I'm on Instagram and on Facebook as well. And I appreciate that.
Amazing, Maria. It's been lovely to have you on today's episode of the Brainz Magazine podcast.
Mark, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure being with you, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for joining this episode with me, Mark Seton. I hope you've really enjoyed it. Feel free to leave us a positive review on iTunes, and I look forward to welcoming you back to the next episode of the Brainz Magazine podcast.